Hi, I'm Michelle, and I'm the Executive Director for Twinless Twin Support Group International. Though our plan would have had us in Denver, we are thankful we get to gather virtually. The nice part about being virtual is that we've been able to gather with people all over the world today. The memory walk and the webinar allowed us to welcome both members of Twinless Twin Support Group and non-members to this virtual conference. So we're glad you're here. There's been a lot of planning and preparation behind the scenes, and we want to thank the Twinless Twin Conference Committee members. These members include Wilmette Combs, Margaret Gran, Denise Lacey, Terry Lewis-Four, Judith Olson, Alyssa Pratt. I have the privilege and pleasure of working with these ladies to plan these conferences, and I just want to thank them personally. So normally when we open an annual conference, one of the first things we do before we move into the keynote talk is we go around the room and we say our twin's name. As a way to remember our twins in a special way, we are going to open the chat for just like a minute and a half. And we ask you to please go onto the chat and type your twin's name in the chat. For example, as I said, my name is Michelle and my twin's Missy. So I'm going to go ahead and type Missy. Why don't you do that now? We see the names coming in. Yeah, keep them coming in. So we're going to leave it open for just another about 10 seconds. About another 5 seconds. Okay, thank you for doing that. It's something special that we do before we start our conference at each annual conference. It's just so amazing to see and to hear the names of our twins. So we want to thank Joan Friedman for being able to be with us today. Again, she was going to be our conference speaker in person, and so it's just a delight that she is here with us virtually. So Dr. Joan Friedman is herself a twin, as well as the mother of twins and a psychotherapist specializing in the treatment of twins and their families. She has written 3 books on the subject of twins, including The Same But Different, which describes how each twin's developmental history is unique and needs to be appreciated from that perspective. She has a degree in clinical social work, as well as 2 doctorates from a prestigious psychoanalytic institutes. For more than 20 years, Joan has spoken nationally and internationally to numerous groups interested in understanding twins on both a personal and professional level. Her goal is to help educate and enlighten audiences about what it's really like to be a twin and to help twins and other multiples balance their connection. It is my pleasure and privilege to welcome Dr. Joan Friedman.
So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm really delighted and honored to be here with you today. As Michelle said, it would have been so much more lovely in person, but we have to do what we have to do, and I so look forward to being in person next year and speaking again and meeting all of you. So I'm going to start with my first slide, which is this, irreversible connection. What I'm doing in my talk today is I'm going to be reading specific paragraphs, and they've all been written by a twinless twin who I'm going to call Mandy because I've changed names so that I can protect her confidentiality. But she did this writing assignment as part of some grief work that she did. And because she's a twinless twin, she writes so beautifully and so heartfelt about so many issues that touch the hearts and minds of people that are navigating the loss of their twin. So this is the first paragraph I want to read. I'll let you know that she is a woman in her mid-30s and her twin passed away about 5 years ago. So here's how Mandy talks about grief. What you don't know is that grief is a perpetual attack on life. It's always there. It's smart too. It lies in wait. Just when I think I feel lighter or feel peace in my heart and mind, or just when I've laughed a lot and felt joy, I get wrecked by grief. It can be a blitz attack or a covert out of nowhere attack. I can try to be aware and ready, and I can compartmentalize effectively, but it doesn't matter. When grief attacks, I'm blindsided and it demolishes my neatly constructed compartments, leaving me raw and devastated again and again. I think this paragraph beautifully describes how losing a twin is something we never get over, even if we're a lone twin or we're a womb twin survivor. We attempt to get through it, but we never get over it. The mourning goes on forever. It has peaks and valleys, but it doesn't end. And all we really want is to have our twin back. The twin bond is a unique experience, and it can't be adequately explicated to outsiders because twins grieve uniquely. And letting go of griefs feels as if we're letting go of our twin. In addition, each twin is the other's emotional legacy. Here is Amandy's next paragraph. She said, as a twin, I had a few names. People couldn't tell us apart, so they called us twin or a Miller twin, or they guessed which one we were. We both got to the point that we'd answer to each other's name. My name was Mandy, twin, Miller, twin, Michelle. People often think twins are exactly the same or two halves that make one person. However, it's almost as if we each had two identities that were entwined or woven together tightly and beautifully. Now that Michelle is gone, I only have one name, but I still have two identities. But instead of their being beautifully woven, they're twisted and tangled. The before Michelle passed away me was logical, structured, perseverant, steady, happy, and mentally healthy. I felt I had a purpose in life. I was passionate about my career. I was willing to try new things. I reached out to my friends regularly and loved spending time with them. I was independent. I liked to travel, both personally and professionally. I laughed a lot. I had little anxiety and I never felt lonely. I really was in control. The after Michelle passed away me is an upside down version of my before self that has taken root. I hate my logical brain because I can't process and reconcile these feelings of grief, loss, anger, regret, and sadness. I can't make sense of why Michelle passed away. Why did she have a rare disease? My structured, steady life is a mess, full of despair that I cannot fix. I'm persevering, but only on the surface. I have happy moments, but those moments are fleeting. I have anxiety over trying new things. Traveling for work and leaving the house is difficult. Work is a chore and I have zero passion for it. I'm super guarded and I don't reach out to my friends as much. I feel alone and I feel out of control. I think this writing beautifully illustrates how losing your twin can destabilize your sense of being. Even though she and her twin lived in different cities, they led separate lives and they had different career paths. The twin bond connected them forever, no matter where they lived or what they were doing. It was that feeling and comfort of knowing that the other one was always there. It really is an inexplicable sense unless you've experienced it personally. Dr. Raymond Brandt, who was the founder of Twinless Twins, wrote in his book, The Twin Loss, that he believed that wholeheartedly in the premise of in utero bonding, that this connection that's formed during gestation accounts for the extraordinary connection that survives forever and can only cease after both twins have passed away. And then, in fact, womb twin survivors feel the sense of something or someone being there for a while, but now gone missing. I want to add my own personal and professional ideas as to why the twin bond is so unique and binding. In my many decades of working with twin patients, I've learned so much about the twin attachment and how it impacts the emotional and psychological lives of twins. I can certainly relate to this on a personal level as well, recalling how much my twin and I relied on each other growing up. My experience and those of many others have shown me that the twin bond is often the most important connection that twin pairs will ever experience. For a host of very complicated reasons, twins are often left to parent one another in the absence of a mother and father who don't fulfill the expectable parenting roles. My twin and I looked after each other all the time. We shared the most essential parts of our lives together, and we kept each other engaged, happy, and supported. When we left to go to separate colleges, I found out how much I missed her, and more importantly, how much I relied on her for so many things. My patients have taught me how much feeling cared about, as well as caring for one's twin, is the cornerstone of their bond. And it's not always a sense of a tangible care. Rather, it's knowing that the twin bond is like an invisible branch that's holding you up. It's always there when you need it and will always be there. So when the branch falls down and the twin bond is broken by the death of the other, one's emotional world collapses. I believe it's so helpful to think about twin loss in the same vein as what it might feel as for a parent losing a child. Because in both these situations, there's nothing that can really assuage or eradicate our loneliness. And to pretend otherwise is to trivialize the loss. Grief is living in a changed world. And this is what Mandy writes about grief. Life will never be the same. I live in Michelle's house, my oasis in this vast, empty desert. Many of my friends think I shouldn't have moved in or should move out now because it's too hard or because I need a fresh start, but they truly don't know where I live. Not living here never entered my mind, not for a second. While Michelle was sick, she would worry about burdening me with her house, but I reassured her I wanted to and needed to live here. She passed away with some peace knowing I'd be here, for which I'm so grateful. At first, it was about being around her things, but it has also provided and still does provide a lot of healing for me. Over the past years, I've blended our things and styles. And in this time, I've made it my house too. I look back and know in my heart that if I would have immediately sold her house, I'd be in a much worse mental state today. I'd be lost in the desert. And living here is my oasis. I know where I live. You know, grief is a very strange thing, and it's so experienced individually differently by everyone. But there are some very generalized truths, I think, that help describe grief, especially early grief. To grieve means to allow yourself to see the devastating truth. To grieve means that the continuity of life is gone, that connections are broken, and that the fragility of human relationships sort of stares us in the face. The pain of loss is excruciating, and daily life feels disorganized and in disarray. We've lost our recognition that the future we assumed we will have will never be. Feelings of emptiness, helplessness, hopelessness, sadness, depression, despondency, and despair. For twins who look in the mirror and they see their brother or sister who's no longer there, it makes it so easy to sort of momentarily forget that your twin isn't living anymore. And these kinds of feelings make you feel sort of like you're being suspended in midair and you have no foundation. It's really being hard finding a structure or a shape for our lives. I wanted to talk a little bit about, this is a woman who I'm, again, changing names, who came to see me after her brother unexpectedly passed away. I'm going to call her Tara, and I'm going to call her twin brother Teddy. Tara was a 40-year-old single mom of a young son. And she had come to see me, I think, about 3 months or 6 months after Teddy passed away unexpectedly. She was absolutely paralyzed. She had had a premonition that she was going to die in surgery. She woke up from the surgery and realized she was alive, and then got the horrible, startling news that Teddy had passed away. And she said, "I want to die instead of Teddy," or "I want to die with Teddy." She was absolutely unable to function for quite a while. She talked to me about Teddy and said that Teddy was her source of unconditional love. And she said, "I lost myself in losing him, and I wish we could have died together." She explained that she and Teddy were each other's best friend and confidant, that the only people they really ever trusted was each other. They kind of kept their authentic and real lives sort of separate and secret from other family members, because they felt that their family members really couldn't understand and accept them. And so their bond was just something very unique and cherished to both of them. Tara was so happy because Teddy had just completed 9 months being drug-free. And she was such an avid supporter of his going to NA meetings and helping him. And she shared in his rosy projections about how this was going to enable him to move on and change his life and get a better job and hopefully, you know, get involved in a romantic relationship. And Tara was so happy to be a part of that. So when he died, her world fell apart because he was no longer there. She was barely able to function. She got out of bed to drive her son to school and then would get home and get back into bed and cry. And she was constantly talking to him and telling him and sharing her feelings. And she also described a few kind of inexplicable, sort of mysterious occurrences where she felt that she had a sign from him, or she could feel his energy. And those times, those fleeting times, gave her such enormous relief and such a sense of well-being. And she just wished that they would have lasted longer, or that there would have been more of them. So as time went on and her grief really wasn't getting any better. She started to have to deal with her family being very upset with her. And her mother would say, "You're just lazy. You need to get over this. You're developing these horrible habits, and you're an awful mother, and you're not taking care of yourself, and you're not getting over it, and basically, you know, what's wrong with you?" And I've heard from other twinless twins who also have families who have really sort of no understanding of how the loss of a twin is a such unique experience. And so the grieving process will be unique as well. And so you imagine or you hope that the people that will be most supportive of you in this grief process end up being the least able to help you, which might mean your parents, your spouse, other siblings. So if that's the case, and this certainly happens because every individual person has their own way of grieving or not grieving. And so you can't expect these close relationships to be able to be open to what you need because of maybe how they're handling or not handling what's going on. So if that's the case for you, instead of keep knocking your head against the wall and feeling so bereft and angry and unsupported, it's really very important to find a grief counselor or grief groups or reach out to somebody in Twinless Twins or even go to a psychotherapist. All these other avenues would be much more helpful because the further along you can get into your grief process, you won't be needing or counting on these other people who aren't equipped to help you. So that was definitely Tara's experience. And she was also so worried about the fact that nobody ever talked about Teddy. Nobody mentioned his name. She told me that nobody wrote on his Facebook page anymore. And it was left to her to organize a ceremony and an honoring when it was the first anniversary of his death, because nobody in her family wanted to do that. So this lack of support that she had, I think, really prolonged her grief process in a way that might have been very different had she felt and been supported by other people. Because this is, when you're going through a loss, what you really need is to find people that you're comfortable talking to all the time, whenever, and you want to feel uncensored and you want to feel open and you just want someone to give you the space to spill out what's ever on your mind and in your heart. And that's how you begin to start to heal. If only. Here is again Mandy's writing. Mandy says, to offer kindness to myself, I have to stop listening to my inner critic telling me I could have done better. I continue to be angry and disappointed in myself, and I obsess over how I failed. I could have spent more time with Michelle. I could have said more to her. I could have called more doctors and specialists. I could have been more patient with our mom. I could have visited mom more to make sure she was taking her meds. I could have paid more attention to her grief after Michelle passed away instead of being consumed by my own. It's so easy to believe I could have done better. However, if I ignore my inner critic and I remind myself each day that I did everything humanly possible to care for them, I can start being kind to myself. I did spend as much time as possible with Michelle. I did talk to her and comfort her on her worst days. I did call doctors and specialists all over the country. I was patient with our mom and begged her to take her meds. I did visit her as much as I could and acknowledged her grief. I did all these things and more. I know I did. I just have to believe it. I have to be kind to myself. I think this so beautifully addresses so many confusing and conflicting feelings that so many people have after their twin dies. And I think maybe the most important piece of this is coming to understand and to be comfortable with what I call ambivalence. And I find in working with my patients who are often estranged twins that having and helping them understand their ambivalence is really key to them getting better. Ambivalence is something that all of us feel in our daily lives with our significant others, with our husbands, our children, our siblings, our friends. It's this capacity to hold on to positive and negative feelings with someone you love at the same time. And I didn't really understand what ambivalence was for a very long time until my therapist helped me understand. I always thought that if you had bad feelings that you were a bad person, rather than understanding that having bad or negative feelings about someone you love is a normal human interaction, because you can't love somebody all the time. You get into conflicts, they make you angry, you get upset, you are disappointed. That having ambivalent feelings are normal in all sorts of close relationships. But if you don't know that and you feel that negative, angry, mad thoughts make you a bad person, then it's going to be very hard to work through the fact that someone you loved is no longer in your life. And I also know that when someone dies, we tend to idealize them, which then makes getting to the heart of the ambivalence a little bit more difficult. So when loved ones die, either expectedly or worse, unexpectedly, most of us are left with lingering and sometimes tormenting thoughts about how we acted, behaved, or even thought about our twin. And this is a common and expectable response, as the loss of that person evokes our experiences with them, good, bad, or indifferent. Grief counselors tell us that many powerful feelings, as well as memories of the relationship, have to be sifted through. Thinking about resentment over things that were not made right, or being cheated by death of what we hoped for in the future, or horrific sadness over what was and can no longer be, and sorrow for the lost past and the younger years that are gone with it. So the ambivalence is being able to really recognize that having both sets of feelings are part and parcel of the human condition, as well as the importance of getting through them when we're processing grief. You know, guilt, I guess, is a little bit more common, but you know, to not admit ambivalent feelings can really interfere with mourning, because it prevents us from making new relationships after bereavement and being able to live meaningfully again. By denying negativity, the mourner impairs love, and with it the capacity to be in loving contacts with others. Beginning to remember the deceased person as a combination of plus and minus is really critical to the issue of resolving loss, in the way in which the average of good and bad of human relationships is accepted and balanced. You know, with guilt, we don't want to feel helpless. So instead, we search for causes and to assign blame and guilt. Death shakes our confidence and our sense of security, and the tendency to go over and over the events leading up to the loss and to find someone to blame even if it means blaming ourselves, is a less disturbing alternative than accepting that life is uncertain. If we can find someone to blame or blame ourselves, then we have a chance of controlling things. It's easier to believe that fate is indifferent or maybe even malevolent than to acknowledge our helplessness in the face of events. Wrongdoings cannot be addressed unless it's possible to identify what they are. So rather than trying to suppress the feelings, the mourner should express them in order to discern what the limits of their responsibilities are. Only in clarifying what they should feel guilty about can they know what they need not feel any guilt over. Very important. Then there's also the guilt that maybe people don't talk about often, which is, why am I still alive and my twin is no longer here? Why did she die? And oftentimes there's so much anger at the person who's gone, anger at ourselves, anger at the system. Twinless Twins really helps members understand and work through this resentment and anger so you can eventually become free of it in the sense that it doesn't have to live so fiercely inside of you. Because finding a way to release negative feelings and using that energy to find good and to find happier and better ways of living are so important. There's also a lot of envy in our anger about when you see other people whose twins didn't die. Like, why did that have to happen to me? And that's a very honest, authentic feeling that I think people legitimately have, and they should recognize that it's real. You are envious and angry that other people have their twin and you may have lost yours. So resolving these feelings are so important because science and statistics tell us that if you don't find a pathway to begin to process your grief, it really does affect your life. Early on, there's higher rates of suicide in early grief. There's illnesses, there's accidents. There's so many ways that not processing grief can affect you. People make hasty decisions, or they work too hard, or they don't work at all. And again, each one will have their own specific pathway, but the focus is on understanding why it's so important to process it at all when you're ready. I just want to tell you a brief, story. This was, I'm going to call her Serena. Serena was a 21-year-old girl who her parents referred her to me after her sister Danielle suicided. And Serena was, again, absolutely incredulous. She had no idea that her sister was in such a bad way. Her sister died by jumping from a balcony in a rehab hospital where she was being treated for bipolar disorder and anorexia. And what was so difficult for Serena was that she never imagined that anything like this would ever happen. She always saw herself as the older sister, and that she very much was a mother to her, to Danielle, and cared about her so very much, had all these plans about how they were going to work together, and they were both sort of budding photographers and filmmakers. They both shared a lot of the same interests. And she also said in a very poignant way that she knew that Danielle's first word that she ever uttered was Serena. So Serena had so much, she had terrifying dreams where she could never rescue Danielle. And she did also think of killing herself too, but she said, out of respect for my parents, I can't possibly allow them to have another tragedy. And what she mostly talked about, which wasn't very much, because she didn't stay in treatment very long, she really wasn't able or ready to process her grief, was how guilty she felt about things that had happened during their adolescence. What Serena did, she said, around the 7th or 8th grade, which is very common to hear in the twins that I know, in the twins that I treat, that she really wanted to have her own separate identity. So she really, at that point, made a very concerted effort to kind of separate from her sister. And this meant that she sort of stopped needing to be a good student. She wanted a social life. She wanted to have a lot of friends. She wanted to be a typical adolescence that belonged to a group. And she did do that. She didn't get great grades, but she felt that she belonged and she had friends and that she was sort of trying to normalize her life and feel good about herself. But in so doing, she was aware that she kind of abandoned her sister. And Danielle, by that time in her adolescence, was already showing signs of mental illness. She missed so many days of school. She really had really no friends. She occupied her time by studying. She was a perfectionist and got very frustrated when things didn't go her way. So they had a very sort of divergent adolescence and together. And actually, Serena described it that they were kind of frozen with each other, sort of on really leading two different lives. And they used to bicker a lot, Serena told me, but it would always end, but they felt, again, very disconnected. It ended up that Danielle went to a college on the East Coast and Serena came to a college on the West Coast. And Danielle did not finish. She dropped out, then she reapplied, then she dropped out again. And, you know, her parents were having a very hard time figuring out what was wrong. During this time, Serena was really pissed off because she felt, again, not understanding or knowing the severity of what Danielle was going through. Maybe no one knew, is that Serena felt that her parents really abandoned her, that all their time was spent on taking care of Danielle and figuring it out and trying to help her. And Serena was angry because Danielle was sucking up everything. And, you know, there was no one had anything left for Serena and she was on her own. And Serena's last memory of physically spending time with Danielle was on a family vacation. And they really didn't get along. And she felt that Danielle wasn't nice to her, was jerking her around and wasn't loving and wasn't caring. And they really didn't spend any time together where they were really able to enjoy each other. So even though they still talked on the phone, and actually they'd had a phone conversation the day before that Danielle killed herself. And Serena said Danielle sounded upbeat, she sounded happy, she was talking about going off on a day pass somewhere. And so getting the shock of the fact that she had killed herself was so devastating. So she really, it's interesting what she said about feeling that I wished I could have kept her alive. And I didn't realize, Serena said, that she needed me in so many ways. And she was so sad and sort of incredulous that she would never, ever be able to talk to her again or see her again, because certainly she lived on so much in her mind, in her internal mind, even though they certainly had conflicts. They were definitely very bonded, and it was a really, really traumatic experience. Okay. here is Mandy's piece about picking up the pieces. Every year, the scent of spring, or in my mind, the scent of the start of softball season floods me with memories of Michelle and makes me miss her even more because we playing softball was such an important part of our lives for such a long time. We both loved the game, and from the time I can remember, we were out back in the yard playing catch. It became our outlet for relieving stress, building confidence, making lifelong friends, having so much fun together. We would always encourage each other and had a friendly competition, which made us both strive to be better. When the scent of spring hits me, I pause for a moment. I can smell the freshly cut grass in the outfield, the dirt in the infield, the hot dogs from the concession stand, and our leather gloves. And then I'm hit with the reality again that we can't play catch anymore. I miss her so much. So finding ways to pick up the pieces is finding a way to honor and hold the past, and at the same time, to commit to stepping boldly toward a new and unknown future. It's so important to retain a strong sense of the continuing presence of the lost person without the turmoil of hope and disappointment, search and frustration, and anger and blame that are present earlier. Well, how do we do this? Well, we begin to do the work necessary to resolve the conflict between the pull of the past and our desire to be happy. Now, I know that feeling of being happy for many twins is so very difficult because many twins feel that being happy means they're being unfaithful or they're betraying their twin, that to be happy is to forget their twin altogether. And of course, it's not true, but it's how it feels. But so the internal process of beginning to allow oneself to feel happy and yet at the same time know that you're not abandoning your twin is really the essence and the work that has to be done. And trying to move forward to accommodate the memory of the past and at the same time reckon with our desire for a new future. We need to work to find activities, people, the kind of work and the experiences that will give us a sense of continuity with our past and yet allow us to move beyond it. It's so painful to find a way to extract purpose and meaning from the past in some new appropriate way in the present, because so much of meaning and purpose are associated with the person who's no longer present. But these long-term adjustments are also part of grieving. It's no small task. Forging a new identity, finding new ways of relating, and new sources of satisfaction, which will be potentially very adapted. Our goal is not to be dominated by loss. And that is really a hard and difficult thing. And again, it's how do we coexist with being happy ourselves, but not having our whole persona dominated by loss? Because to live in a world where you're dominated by loss can really facilitate, again, depression and self-destructive behaviors and addictions and illnesses. And it's so important for one's physical and emotional health to be able to move through the grief process. I wanted to talk just a few minutes about, this is a very interesting situation I had. A woman came to me, a twin in her 60s, who came to me, at the time she came to me a few years ago, her twin was still living. However, her twin had a cancer diagnosis when she and her twin were in their mid-20s. So my patient had been living with her twin and her twin's diagnosis for many years. But when this patient came to see me, her twin was in remission. And what I learned so much about helping this woman was she was coming to see me, not because she resented any of the caretaking lifestyle that she had adopted with her twin and that she was continuing to do with love and devotion and energy and compassion. But what she was talking about was what would her life had been like had she not been a twin? I mean, and this is, again, something people think about all the time. Like, what if I'd married a different man? Or what if my son actually turned out to be a good athlete? It isn't all wrong or bad. It's actually quite wonderful, quite enlightening, and quite self-reflective to think about what your life would have been like if you'd been born into different circumstances. So this woman had told me that she was always her twins' caretaker from the time they were very little, and I know this is many people's experiences. So she would, she really was organizing so much of her life to take care of her twin. She, this was going on in school, going on socially, going on in the family. And this was what she was always doing and that she didn't mind doing. And being available for her sister all these years to help her through the illness was also something she was happy to do. And it was also very important for us to talk about, and what would it have been like had this not been her life? So she was kind of doing this work because when she was thinking about what would she be like? What was her life like? When she was thinking about this and reflecting about this, she was really working through a revised version of herself, a revised version of her identity. And what was so, in hindsight, so important that we have learned that her sister did eventually die a year or so after she had been in treatment with me. And of course, her early morning period was very, very difficult, just like anyone else's. But as time has gone on, I have really been able to watch her move through her grief process in a very healthy way because of the work that we did in psychotherapy. So when she's looking toward picking up the pieces and finding joy in life and finding satisfaction and allowing herself to feel a sense of accomplishment and to try to return to a steady state of balance and widen her friendships and social networks. I do really believe that our work together and our exploring this other part of her made her grief process healthier and shorter because she had done so much work beforehand on her own self prior to losing her twin. I think it's also important at this time to talk about or just think about the difference between loneliness and solitude. I mean, loneliness is always thought about as negative because you're lonely and you don't feel connected and you're all by yourself. But solitude is really being able to enjoy being by yourself. And I know this is a hard concept for many twins, but solitude is a time, if you can embrace it and you can begin to feel that it's something nourishing and positive and creative, that you can start thinking about solitude in a really wonderful way where you can nourish yourself as opposed to feeling always alone and always lonely. So I want to conclude with one more paragraph that Mandy wrote, but also just say that the death of a twin is a profound ripping of bonds of connection that can only be integrated into the whole picture of one's life. It can never be compensated for or amended in any way. Some people scoff at the notion that losing a twin can be pervasive and long-lasting. And that's because often our loss is often not recognized by others. Our past is the basis of everything we've learned about what does and what does not make us happy. And so much of the structure and shape and purpose and meaning of the past is tied up with the person who's no longer present. So again, it's no small task to forge a different identity so we can find new ways of relating and new sources of satisfaction. So here is Amandy's last paragraph about grief. I have a friend who lives her own grief in a way that gives me encouragement, inspiration, and direction. I could simply say she shows strength and courage every day she lives with her grief. But it's so much more than that. She feels every part of her grief, embracing her good days and her unbearable days, and confronts it on intentionally with grace. When we talk about our grief, she's demonstrative, honest, raw, kind, empathic, sympathetic, dark at times, and unbelievably funny. We talk often, and during one conversation, I can experience the whole gamut of emotions. I'll be sad and cry, I'll get mad, then laugh hysterically. During the past several months, she's helped me realize that for so long, I tried to ignore, control, and neatly compartmentalize my grief. She has pushed me way out of my comfort zone, forcing me to feel every part of my grief and confront it intentionally with grace, albeit a clumsy grace. So I just want to tell you, again, I wish I could hear you and thank you for listening, but I just have to virtually thank you for listening. And I really hope that my talk has been helpful and insightful. And I so look forward to seeing everybody in person next July in Denver. And I really would urge everyone to find the appropriate place to work through feelings of grief so that your sense of your twinship can become peaceful and comforting and loving. So thank you very much. And I'll see you in July next year.
So thank you, Dr. Friedman. You just spoke to our hearts talking about the profoundness of the twin bond. You put words to the deep pain from the loss we've experienced. And thank you for helping us just to process the complexities of twin loss. And as she just spoke of, many of you knew that she will be joining us next year as the keynote speaker. You might be wondering, what are the dates for the annual conference? They will be Thursday through Saturday, July 9th through 11th, 20 of 21. And so we hope that you can attend. So the next steps for today will be that all Twinless Twin members who pre-registered are invited to join us in breakout sessions to kind of further discussions. These breakouts will be held from 2:30 to 4, and we just ask that you please use the link that we sent to you to be sure to sign on using the email address you registered with. So normally at our conferences, we would close our meetings, honestly, with a bunch of hugs, some twin hugs. They feel so good. So please know as we sign off from this webinar that you are not alone, that together we form a twinless twin community, and we always remember our precious twins. Thanks.